In the brutal, beautiful theater of professional ice hockey, there are roles for every kind of player. There's the graceful goal scorer, the artist who paints masterpieces with a puck. There's the visionary playmaker, seeing the game 3 steps ahead of everyone else. And then there is the enforcer, the protector, the man whose job it is to stand guard over the artists, to answer any slight against them with a currency of raw, bare-knuckled justice. He is the warrior on the ice, the one who absorbs the blows so others don't have to. Fans cheer his name when he defends a star player. His teammates view him as an essential shield, the ultimate guarantor of their safety. He builds a career on a reputation for toughness, for fearlessness, for being the guy who will go into the darkest corners and do the dirty work. But what happens when the lights of the arena go down for the last time? What becomes of the warrior when his battle on the ice is over? But a far more terrifying, silent war is just beginning inside his own mind. This is the story of Todd Ewen, a man celebrated as one of hockey's toughest protectors, and the devastating private battle that no one, not even he, could save him from. It's a story about the hidden costs of a violent game, the terrifying complexities of the human brain, and the heartbreaking search for answers when a hero falls. To understand Todd Ewen's life, you have to understand the world that created him, the National Hockey League of the 1980s and 1990s. This was a different era of hockey. While superstars like Wayne Gretzky and Mario Lemieux were dazzling crowds with their incredible skill, a parallel culture of extreme physicality not only existed, but thrived. The legacy of the 1970s Philadelphia Flyers, the infamous Broad Street Bullies who bashed their way to 2 Stanley Cups, still echoed through the league. Fighting wasn't just an occasional outburst, it was a strategic, and for many, an essential part of the game. In this world, the role of the enforcer or goon was codified. Every team had one, and often more. Their job was straightforward, to protect the team's star players. If an opponent took a cheap shot at your goal scorer, it was the enforcer's duty to make him pay, immediately and decisively. This created a delicate, violent balance of power, a system of mutually assured destruction on ice. This system operated under an unwritten set of rules known as the Code. Enforcers policed the game themselves, and a player who accepted a fight was, in a strange way, showing respect. It was a brutal but structured part of the hockey culture. These men weren't just seen as thugs. Within their own locker rooms, they were often the most respected and beloved teammates, the big brothers who would do anything to keep the family safe. It was into this world of speed, skill, and sanctioned violence that a young, tough kid from Western Canada named Todd Ewen would carve his name. Todd Ewen was born on March 22, 1966, in Saskatoon, Saskatchewan, and grew up in St. Albert, Alberta. Like so many kids from the Canadian prairies, hockey was in his blood. He was a big, strong kid, and it quickly became apparent that his path to the pros would be paved with his fists as much as his skating. He played his junior hockey for the Kamloops Junior Oilers and the New Westminster Bruins, where he honed the skills of his trade. He wasn't just a fighter, he was a serviceable hockey player, but his toughness was his ticket to the show. In 1984, the Edmonton Oilers, then the greatest dynasty in hockey, drafted him. But he would never play for Gretzky's Oilers. Instead, his career began in St. Louis with the Blues in the 1986-87 season. It was here that his identity was truly forged. The Blues had a young phenom in the making, a sniper named Brett Hull, who would go on to be one of the greatest goal scorers in history. Todd Ewen's primary job, along with fellow tough guys like Tony Twist and Kelly Chase, was to be Brett Hull's personal bodyguard on skates. They formed a feared trio known as the Bruise Brothers. The message to the rest of the league was simple. If you touch Hull, you answer to us. Ewen embraced the role. He earned the nickname The Animal for his ferocious, relentless fighting style. He wasn't the biggest enforcer in the league, but he was famously strong and had a chin made of granite. He would drop the gloves with anyone, from the giants like Bob Probert to the technical fighters, and he rarely came out on the losing end. For 7 seasons, he was a fixture on the Saint, Louis blue-collar hockey scene, a fan favorite who embodied the tough, gritty spirit of the city. He played his role to perfection, racking up 1,283 penalty minutes in just 348 games with the Blues. His knuckles were bruised, his face was scarred, but he was living his dream. The absolute pinnacle of his career, the moment every hockey player dreams of, came in 1993. Ewen had been traded to the Montreal Canadiens, one of the most storied franchises in all of sports. That season, against all odds, the Canadiens, led by the brilliant goaltending of Patrick Roy, went on an incredible playoff run. Todd Ewen wasn't a star on that team, but he was a vital piece of the puzzle. He was the muscle, the gritty character player who kept the opposition honest and provided a physical presence in the locker room and on the ice. In June of 1993, he hoisted the Stanley Cup, the holy grail of hockey. For a kid from the prairies who had fought his way to the top, it was the ultimate validation. He was a champion. After his championship season in Montreal, Ewen's career continued. He was picked up by the newly formed Anaheim Mighty Ducks. It was a strange and wonderful contrast. The grizzled, tough-as-nails enforcer playing for a team owned by Disney and named after a children's movie. But here, too, he found a home and a role, providing veteran leadership and toughness for the fledgling franchise. He finished his 11-year NHL career with a stint in San Jose with the Sharks, finally hanging up his skates after the 1996-97 season. His career statistics tell the story of his role: 518 games played, 36 goals, 40 assists, and a staggering 1,911 penalty minutes. He had engaged in an estimated 150-plus fights in the NHL alone. His body had been a battering ram for over a decade. He retired at 31, a young man in the real world, but an old man in hockey years. And like so many professional athletes, especially those in such physically demanding roles, he was immediately faced with a terrifying question. What am I now? The roar of the crowd was gone. The camaraderie of the locker room had vanished. The identity he had spent his entire life building, that of Todd Ewen the Animal, was retired along with his jersey. This is where the second, more private, and ultimately more tragic chapter of Todd Ewen's life begins. He moved on, building a life after hockey. He settled in the St. Louis area with his wife Kelly and their children. He threw himself into new passions with the same intensity he had brought to the ice. He coached youth hockey, mentoring young players. He was a devoted father and husband, and he revealed a side of himself that few hockey fans ever knew existed. The man known as the Animal, the fearsome brawler, was a gentle, creative soul. He began writing and illustrating a series of children's books under the title The Grimsy. They were charming, whimsical stories, a world away from the brutal ballet of an NHL fight. This wasn't just a hobby. He was passionate about it. He poured his heart into creating these gentle worlds for children, a stark and beautiful contradiction to the public persona that had defined his career. He was also a talented artist and photographer. He had found a new way to express himself, a new identity to build. On the surface, it seemed like a successful transition from the violent world of pro sports to a peaceful, fulfilling family life. But beneath the surface, a storm was gathering. Over the years, things began to change. The man his family knew, the funny, energetic, loving husband and father, started to fade. He began to struggle with severe bouts of depression. His memory started to fail him. He would forget conversations he'd just had. He developed a slight slur in his speech. His moods became unpredictable, swinging from periods of high energy to dark, debilitating lows. He had trouble sleeping. Kelly Ewen, his wife, watched in fear as the man she loved seemed to be slowly slipping away. Todd himself was terrified. He was a proud man, and he tried to hide his struggles, especially his depression. In the old-school hockey culture he came from, mental health was not something you talked about. You were supposed to be tough, to suck it up, to play through the pain. Admitting to a struggle of the mind felt like a weakness he couldn't afford to show. But his fear was compounded by a growing, terrifying narrative that was taking hold in the world of contact sports. Former athletes, particularly football players and hockey enforcers, were dying young. Many took their own lives. And when their brains were studied posthumously, they were often found to be riddled with a degenerative brain disease called chronic traumatic encephalopathy, or CTE. CTE is a disease caused by repeated head trauma, including subconcussive hits that don't necessarily lead to a diagnosed concussion. Its symptoms are insidious and terrifyingly similar to what Todd was experiencing: depression, memory loss, confusion, impaired judgment, and aggression. The names were a tragic roll call of his peers, men who had played the same role he had. Bob Probert, the legendary Detroit Red Wings enforcer, died of heart failure at 45. His brain was found to have CTE. Derek Boogaard, another giant enforcer, died of an accidental overdose at 28. He had advanced CTE. Rick Ripien, a younger tough guy, died by suicide at 27. He had struggled with severe depression. Wade Balak, another enforcer, died by suicide at 35. Todd saw himself in these stories. He had suffered countless blows to the head, both in fights and from general play. He had multiple diagnosed concussions, and likely hundreds of undiagnosed ones. He connected the dots and came to a conclusion that seemed to him to be inescapable. He had CTE. He believed his brain was deteriorating, that the damage was done, and that his future was a dark, inevitable slide into dementia and despair. This belief took hold of him, feeding his depression and his sense of hopelessness. He felt he was becoming a burden to his family, that the man he once was gone forever, and that a terrible disease was consuming him from the inside out. The personal stories from this period are heartbreaking. Kelly Ewen has spoken about how gentle and loving he was, even as he struggled. She described him as a gentle giant off the ice, a man who would cry at sad movies. He was the opposite of the animal. Teammates from every team he played for echoed this sentiment. He was universally described as a great guy, a loyal friend, the kind of person you wanted in your corner, both literally and figuratively. His foray into children's literature becomes even more poignant in this context. It was an escape, a way to connect with a softer, more innocent part of himself that the world of hockey had forced him to suppress. One of his former teammates, Chase, has recalled how Ewen, after a brutal game, would be in the back of the team bus, not drinking or boasting, but sketching in a notepad, already creating the characters and worlds that would become his books. It was a beautiful, secret part of his life. But the secret battle in his mind was becoming overwhelming. He began to document his struggles, writing down his symptoms and his fears. He was convinced he was losing himself. Despite the love of his family and the support of his friends, the depression, amplified by the terror of CTE, was too powerful. He felt trapped. In September 2015, the protector, the man who had always been there to save others, felt he could not be saved himself. On September 19, 2015, at his home in Wildwood, Missouri, Todd Ewen died by suicide. He was 49 years old. He left a note for his family, expressing his love for them, but also his profound pain and his belief that his brain was broken beyond repair. The hockey world was stunned. Another enforcer, another tough guy, gone far too soon. Another victim of what seemed to be the clear and present danger of a life spent absorbing punches. The story seemed tragically simple. Hockey, concussions, CTE, depression, suicide. It fit the narrative perfectly. But the most shocking and complex part of Todd Ewen's story was yet to come. This brings us to the most controversial and difficult part of this story: the debate over CTE and its role in Todd Ewen's death. In the wake of his suicide, the connection to CTE seemed obvious to everyone, including his grieving family. He had displayed all the classic symptoms. He played the most at-risk role in a violent sport. His death was seen as another tragic data point in the growing case against the NHL and other sports leagues for not doing enough to protect their players from the long-term consequences of head trauma. Driven by a need for answers and a desire to help other athletes, Kelly Ewen made the difficult decision to donate Todd's brain to be studied. She sent it to the renowned Canadian Concussion Center in Toronto, led by Dr. Lilinaz Hazrati. The family expected the results to confirm what they, and Todd himself, had believed so strongly, that his brain would show the telltale signs of chronic traumatic encephalopathy. They were bracing for a confirmation of their worst fears, which would at least provide a concrete, physical reason for his immense suffering. Months later, the results came back, and they were a bombshell. The neuropathologist's report was definitive. Todd Ewen did not have CTE. There were no signs of the abnormal tau protein deposits that are the signature of the disease. His brain, from a CTE perspective, was normal for a man his age. This revelation was a profound shock, and it turned the entire narrative of his death on its head. The simple tragic story of a hockey player killed by a degenerative brain disease was suddenly much, much more complicated. If it wasn't CTE, then what had caused his profound depression, his memory loss, his suffering, his despair? The answer, as suggested by the doctors and his family, was as tragic as it was common. Todd Ewen had been suffering from a severe, and for a long time untreated, case of clinical depression. It was a mental illness, not a degenerative brain disease. This finding ignited a fierce debate. On one hand, it highlighted the immense power of mental illness to mimic the symptoms of other conditions. It underscored the tragedy of a man who died, in part, because he was convinced he had a disease that he didn't actually possess. The overwhelming public narrative about CTE and enforcers may have, in a terrible twist of fate, contributed to his hopelessness. He saw a path laid out by his peers and believed he was irrevocably on it. His wife Kelly spoke about this agonizing complexity. She said, "He was suffering from depression, and he was sold on the fact that it was CTE. What I want to get out there is that you can suffer from depression, and it doesn't have to be CTE." She worried that other former athletes suffering from treatable depression might see the CTE stories and, like Todd, give up hope, believing their condition was permanent and degenerative. On the other hand, some in the concussion advocacy community were skeptical. They argued that our understanding of CTE is still in its infancy and that the absence of a specific protein doesn't mean his brain was undamaged from a decade of fighting. The debate remains unsettled, a complex intersection of neuroscience, psychology, and the raw, personal grief of a family seeking answers. Todd Ewen's case became a crucial, albeit heartbreaking, cautionary tale. It proved that while CTE is a very real danger, not every psychological struggle faced by a former athlete can or should be attributed to it. The silent epidemic of depression, of identity loss after a career ends, is its own distinct and deadly serious crisis. The story of Todd Ewen's life and death has had a profound and lasting significance. It has forced a more nuanced and vital conversation about the health of athletes, one that goes beyond just brain plaques and tangles. His story is a powerful testament to the fact that the mind is as vulnerable as the body. First, it has highlighted the immense psychological challenge that athletes face upon retirement. For years, their identity is singular. They are a hockey player, a football player, a warrior. When that is stripped away, the void can be immense and can lead to a profound crisis of purpose and self-worth, which is a major trigger for depression. We celebrate these athletes for their physical sacrifices, but we have, for too long, ignored the psychological toll their careers take and the support they desperately need when they transition back into normal life. Second, his tragic story has undeniably put a human face on the incredible burden carried by hockey's enforcers. These men were paid to be violent, to absorb and inflict punishment for the good of the team. They were cheered for it, but the league and the culture often discarded them once their bodies were too broken to continue. Ewen's life asks a difficult question of the sport and its fans. What do we owe these men who sacrifice their physical and mental well-being for our entertainment and the safety of their teammates? Finally, and perhaps most importantly, Todd's story, especially the stunning revelation about the absence of CTE, has been a crucial turning point in the conversation about mental health in sports. It serves as a powerful, painful reminder that depression is a disease in and of itself. It is not a sign of weakness. It is not something that can be willed away, especially not for men conditioned their whole lives to be tough. His death has helped, in some small way, to break down the stigma, encouraging current and former athletes to speak up about their mental health struggles and to seek help. It has forced us to acknowledge that the silent battles of the mind can be just as deadly as the most visible physical injuries. His legacy is not one of shame or weakness, but a powerful, heartbreaking plea. It's a plea to look beyond the helmet, beyond the fists, and beyond the headlines to see the complex, fragile, and beautiful human being inside. It's a reminder that we must take the invisible wounds of the mind as seriously as the visible scars on the body. Todd Ewen was the protector on the ice, But his story now serves to protect others, reminding us all that the toughest battles are often the ones we cannot see.